Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a tale of power, betrayal, and the deadly dance between organized crime and Las Vegas glitz. This is the story of how mobsters built, controlled, and lost their grip on Sin City, from the Flamingo to the Stardust. With millions at stake and countless lives ruined, this story will leave you asking, how far would the mob go to build their empire in the desert? And how did their house of cards come crashing down? When the lights of the Las Vegas Strip first began to sparkle in the desert night, few knew the blood and betrayal lurking in the shadows. Behind the glitz and glamour, the mob's iron fist ruled with an invisible grip. But beneath the shiny veneer of slot machines and showgirls, a deadly web of power struggles and greed turned the city into a powder keg ready to explode. Las Vegas in the 1940s was a small town surrounded by miles of desolate desert. It had little to offer aside from dusty streets and a handful of casinos catering to travelers. But to Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, it was a blank canvas, a place where his vision of a lavish gambling paradise could come to life. Siegel was no ordinary gangster. He was charismatic, stylish, and ambitious, with an unshakable confidence that bordered on arrogance. He had long been a rising star in the mob world, a trusted figure among East Coast crime families. Bugsy had a plan to turn Las Vegas into a destination unlike any other, and at the center of his dream was the Flamingo Hotel. Unlike the smoky, dimly lit gambling dens of the time, the Flamingo would be grand, luxurious, and filled with glamour. It would feature opulent rooms, a massive casino floor, and a theater for big-name entertainers. Bugsy was convinced it would attract celebrities, high rollers, and tourists from across the country. He secured funding from mob bosses back east, promising them incredible returns on their investment. The money poured in, but so did the problems. Construction of the Flamingo was plagued by delays, cost overruns, and frequent changes to Siegel's extravagant vision. Every setback meant more money, and by the time the project neared completion, its budget had ballooned to over $6 million, an astronomical sum for the time. The pressure mounted as the mob bosses began to grow impatient. Rumors swirled that Siegel was skimming money off the top for himself, a crime that carried the ultimate punishment in the world of organized crime. Still, Siegel pressed on, determined to prove that his vision would succeed. The Flamingo finally opened its doors in December 1946. But instead of the grand debut Siegel had envisioned, it was a disaster. The hotel wasn't fully finished, and its incomplete appearance left guests unimpressed. A stormy winter further dampened the opening, and the few visitors who arrived quickly left, leaving the casino floor nearly empty. After just a few weeks, the Flamingo shut its doors temporarily to address its shortcomings. Bugsy begged for more time and promised the mob that his dream would soon pay off. Against all odds, when the Flamingo reopened in early 1947, it began to turn a profit. The tide seemed to be shifting in Bugsy's favor. Crowds began to pour in, drawn by the luxurious accommodations, glamorous atmosphere, and the high-profile celebrities who now frequented the resort. But for the mob, it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. The bosses were convinced Siegel had stolen from them, and despite the Flamingo's newfound success, his fate was sealed. In June 1947, Bugsy was sitting in a Beverly Hills mansion when an unknown assailant fired through the window, killing him instantly. The message was clear: no one was untouchable. Though Siegel was gone, his legacy endured. The Flamingo became a symbol of the potential that Las Vegas held, a city where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. Yet behind the bright lights and flowing champagne, Bugsy's murder served as a reminder of the dark forces that truly controlled the city. His dream had become a reality, but it came at the ultimate price. Las Vegas was now on its way to becoming the gambling capital of the world, but the mob wasn't done yet. As the Flamingo flourished, new players entered the game, determined to stake their claim in this glittering empire in the desert. What followed was a brutal fight for power, with the stakes higher than ever. The Flamingo's success was just the beginning of a much darker tale. After the success of the Flamingo, Las Vegas began to transform into a booming gambling and entertainment destination. By the 1950s, more casinos sprang up along what would become the famous Las Vegas Strip, each one grander than the last. Behind the glittering lights, however, the mob maintained its iron grip, quietly pulling the strings to control the city's burgeoning empire. Among these casinos, one would become synonymous with their power and influence: the Stardust. The Stardust Hotel and Casino opened in 1958 and immediately captured attention for its size and luxury. It wasn't just a casino, it was a spectacle. The sprawling resort featured over 1,000 rooms, a massive pool, and an iconic neon sign that lit up the desert sky. It was designed to attract high rollers, tourists, and celebrities alike, but for the mob, it was much more than a business. The Stardust became the centerpiece of an elaborate scheme that funneled untold millions into their pockets. The key to this operation was Frank Lefty Rosenthal, a gambling genius who understood every aspect of running a casino. Rosenthal was meticulous, calculating, and focused on maximizing profits. He knew how to attract the right clientele, manage the casino floor, and keep the money flowing. Officially, he wasn't allowed to hold a gaming license due to his criminal ties, but that didn't stop him from becoming the de facto boss of the Stardust. While Rosenthal ran the show inside the casino, the mob needed someone on the outside to handle less savory tasks. Enter Tony the Ant Spilotro, a ruthless enforcer who made sure everyone stayed in line. Spilotro's reputation for violence was well known, and he wasn't afraid to use fear to maintain control. Together, Rosenthal and Spilotro formed a powerful yet volatile partnership that kept the Stardust firmly under mob control. The heart of the operation was the skimming. Money flowed into the casino from gamblers around the world, but before it could be counted and reported to the state, large sums were quietly removed and sent back to the mob bosses in Chicago, Kansas City, and other cities. The skimming process was intricate and highly secretive. The cash was hidden in suitcases with false bottoms, slipped past inspectors, and flown out of Las Vegas on private planes. This system allowed the mob to make millions in untaxed revenue while maintaining the illusion of legitimacy. For years, the operation ran like clockwork, with the Stardust becoming a cash cow for organized crime. But greed and ambition began to create cracks in the foundation. Rosenthal was fiercely protective of his methods and demanded absolute control over every detail of the casino's operations. His obsession with perfection often clashed with Spilotro's unpredictable and violent nature. Spilotro, who was known for his short temper and increasingly reckless behavior, began drawing unwanted attention to their enterprise. Spilotro's violent methods didn't just enforce loyalty, they also created enemies. As bodies began to pile up in the desert, local law enforcement and the FBI took notice. Spilotro's growing reputation as a mob enforcer painted a target on both him and the Stardust. This attracted federal investigators who began digging into the casino's finances and looking for evidence of illegal activity. Adding to the tension was Spilotro's decision to run his own side operation in Las Vegas. He assembled a gang known as the Hole-in-the-Wall Crew, specializing in burglaries and theft. Their activities brought even more scrutiny from authorities, and Rosenthal grew increasingly frustrated with the attention Spilotro's antics were bringing to their carefully managed empire. Despite the growing tensions, the skimming operation continued. But cracks were forming, and the FBI was closing in. Undercover agents infiltrated the casino, planting bugs and gathering evidence. Federal auditors began to uncover irregularities in the casino's financial records, and whistleblowers stepped forward, exposing the hidden compartments and suitcases used to siphon money. Rosenthal's once flawless operation was beginning to unravel. His focus on maintaining control blinded him to the growing storm around him, while Spilotro's unpredictable behavior threatened to bring everything crashing down. By the late 1970s, the Stardust was no longer the untouchable fortress it once was. Law enforcement had collected enough evidence to build a case against the mob's skimming operations, and the FBI prepared to strike. What had once been a glittering symbol of power and wealth now stood on the brink of collapse, as the mob's carefully constructed empire began to crumble under the weight of its own greed. The Stardust had made the mob millions, but the greed and infighting that fueled its success were now its greatest weaknesses. The uneasy partnership between Rosenthal and Spilotro would soon reach a breaking point, and the consequences would be deadly. The era of the mob's dominance in Las Vegas was beginning to show its cracks, but the final collapse was yet to come. The bright lights of the Stardust hid the shadows of betrayal, and as the pressure mounted, one thing was certain: those shadows were about to consume everyone involved. As the 1960s dawned, the mob's hold on Las Vegas was as strong as ever, but the forces aligning against them were growing. The FBI, spurred on by public pressure to crack down on organized crime, began a series of covert operations aimed at infiltrating the casinos and dismantling the skimming networks. For years, the mob had operated in near-complete secrecy, its methods hidden in the shadows. Now, federal agents were determined to bring those secrets into the light. The operations weren't without risks. The mob had eyes and ears everywhere, and anyone who dared to challenge their grip on Las Vegas often met a violent end. Agents relied on undercover work and surveillance, planting listening devices in casino offices and hotel rooms. The goal was to track the flow of money, identify the players involved, and gather enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. It was a game of patience, one the FBI was willing to play. In the midst of this escalating conflict, Karen Malone emerged as a key figure in the story. Karen had worked her way up from a low-level casino clerk to a trusted bookkeeper at the Stardust. She had access to the casino's financial records and was well aware of the skimming operation. For years, she played her role carefully, ensuring the numbers added up and that no red flags appeared in the official reports. But Karen had ambitions of her own. Tired of being a pawn in the mob's game, she decided to play a dangerous double role. Karen began leaking information to the FBI, feeding them details about the skimming operation and the hidden channels through which the money flowed. She provided diagrams of secret cash rooms and the methods used to conceal large sums of money. Her information gave federal agents the breakthrough they needed to start building a case against the mob. But Karen wasn't entirely selfless. She saw an opportunity to take her own cut of the operation and began siphoning money from the Stardust's funds. It was a high-stakes gamble, and one that would cost her dearly. The mob, always vigilant for signs of betrayal, eventually grew suspicious of Karen. Tony Spilotro, ever the enforcer, was tasked with uncovering the truth. Karen's double life began to unravel when discrepancies appeared in the books, discrepancies she couldn't fully explain. Spilotro's investigation quickly led him to the conclusion that Karen wasn't just careless, she was disloyal. In the mob's world, disloyalty was a death sentence. Karen's fate was sealed. One night she disappeared without a trace. Days later, her body was discovered in a shallow grave in the Nevada desert, a grim reminder of the mob's reach and ruthlessness. Karen's death sent a chilling message to anyone else who might consider betraying the organization. But it also marked a turning point. Her leaks to the FBI had already set the wheels of justice in motion, and the mob's secrets were no longer as secure as they once were. As the FBI pieced together their case, they began to close in on the skimming operation at the Stardust. Surveillance tapes captured whispered conversations about hidden cash, and financial audits revealed evidence of massive discrepancies between reported earnings and actual revenue. Undercover agents befriended low-level casino employees, gaining access to restricted areas and gathering vital information. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to unraveling the mob's control. Meanwhile, Spilotro's increasing brutality drew even more attention to the Stardust. His violent tactics, while effective at maintaining fear and order, created a trail of blood that law enforcement couldn't ignore. Local officials, pressured by the federal government, began cooperating more actively with the FBI. What had once been a fortress of corruption was now under siege from all sides. The cracks in the mob's empire were growing wider. Karen's betrayal had exposed vulnerabilities the mob hadn't anticipated, and Spilotro's violent methods were becoming a liability. For decades, the mob had ruled Las Vegas with an iron grip, but their ability to operate in the shadows was slipping away. With every new piece of evidence, the FBI tightened the noose, preparing for the moment when they could strike. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, the mob's control over Las Vegas was still formidable, but it was no longer absolute. The Stardust, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a focal point of federal scrutiny. The FBI had uncovered the hidden mechanisms that powered the skimming operation, and Karen Malone's tragic gamble had provided them with the roadmap they needed. The mob still had cards to play, but for the first time it seemed that their hold on Las Vegas might not last forever. The shadows were receding, and the light was beginning to expose the rot beneath the glitz and glamour. The 1970s marked the beginning of the end for the mob's iron grip on Las Vegas. The federal government, emboldened by new evidence and public outcry, launched an all-out offensive against organized crime. The Stardust remained at the center of their efforts, as it was not only one of the most profitable casinos under mob control, but also the site of some of the most blatant skimming activities. The mob's empire, once unassailable, was now under siege from all sides. Frank Lefty Rosenthal, the operational mastermind behind the Stardust, had always believed his attention to detail would protect him from scrutiny. He ran the casino with precision, carefully managing every aspect of its operations, from the games on the casino floor to the food served in the restaurants. His obsession with control bordered on paranoia, but it was that same obsession that made the Stardust one of the most profitable casinos on the Strip. However, the skimming operations that funneled millions of dollars to mob bosses were no longer as hidden as they once were. Federal investigators had planted surveillance devices in key locations within the casino, capturing conversations that revealed the inner workings of the operation. The FBI's investigation was methodical, relying on informants, undercover agents, and wiretaps to gather evidence. One of their most significant breakthroughs came when they intercepted conversations between Rosenthal and his associates, discussing the precise methods used to skim money from the casino's earnings. These conversations, combined with the financial discrepancies uncovered by auditors, painted a damning picture of the mob's illegal activities. Each piece of evidence brought the FBI closer to dismantling the operation, but the mob wasn't going down without a fight. As law enforcement closed in, cracks began to form within the mob itself. Rosenthal and Spilotro, once partners in maintaining control of the Stardust, found themselves at odds. Rosenthal viewed Spilotro's increasingly erratic behavior as a threat to the carefully constructed empire they had built. Spilotro, in turn, resented Rosenthal's obsession with control and his refusal to tolerate any disruptions to the casino's operations. Their partnership, once built on mutual respect and shared goals, deteriorated into hostility and distrust. Rosenthal's personal life added another layer of chaos to the unraveling empire. His tumultuous relationship with his wife, Jerry, became a public spectacle. Jerry's ties to Spilotro further complicated matters, creating a volatile triangle of tension, jealousy, and betrayal. The turmoil in Rosenthal's personal life spilled into his professional world, further destabilizing the fragile balance of power at the Stardust. The FBI, sensing an opportunity, intensified their efforts. They worked to exploit the divisions within the mob, turning informants and gathering more evidence. Undercover agents infiltrated the Stardust and other mob-controlled casinos, gaining access to restricted areas and documenting the skimming operations in unprecedented detail. The once impenetrable wall of silence that had protected the mob was beginning to crumble. In 1982, a dramatic turn of events signaled the beginning of the end for Rosenthal. His car, a Cadillac Eldorado, exploded in a parking lot after he turned the ignition. Miraculously, Rosenthal survived the blast, but the incident was a clear message. His enemies, whether within the mob or from external forces, were closing in. The explosion became a turning point, symbolizing the collapse of the mob's dominance in Las Vegas. The attack not only shook Rosenthal's confidence, but also drew even more public and law enforcement attention to the mob's activities. The investigation into the Stardust reached its climax when federal agents executed raids on the casino and other mob-controlled properties. They uncovered evidence of skimming, financial fraud, and widespread corruption. The arrests that followed dealt a severe blow to the mob's operations, leading to convictions that dismantled the skimming networks and removed key figures from power. The once unshakable empire that had ruled Las Vegas for decades was now on the brink of collapse. With the mob's grip loosening, the corporate world began to take notice. Legitimate businesses and investors, eager to capitalize on the growing popularity of Las Vegas, moved in to buy out the troubled casinos. The Stardust, once the jewel of the mob's empire, became a symbol of the transition from a city ruled by organized crime to one dominated by corporate interests. The bright lights of the strip still shone, but the shadows that had long hidden the mob's influence were beginning to fade. The 1980s marked a dramatic shift in the history of Las Vegas. The mob's once iron grip on the city was slipping, and the forces of law and order were finally breaking through. Federal investigations into the skimming operations at the Stardust and other mob-controlled casinos had led to a series of high-profile raids, arrests, and trials. The intricate web of corruption that had enabled the mob to dominate the strip was unraveling, and a new era was dawning. But the transition would be anything but smooth, as the city underwent one of the most turbulent periods in its history. The FBI's relentless investigation into the Stardust culminated in a legal onslaught that left the mob reeling. Key figures, including high-ranking mob bosses and casino executives, faced trial on charges ranging from financial fraud to racketeering. The evidence gathered over years of surveillance and undercover operations was overwhelming. Wiretaps revealed the intricate details of the skimming schemes, financial records exposed massive discrepancies, and witnesses came forward to testify about the mob's activities. The trials were a media sensation, pulling back the curtain on the mob's hidden world. Once powerful figures were paraded into courtrooms, their reputations shattered. Some attempted to strike deals with prosecutors, offering information in exchange for reduced sentences. Others maintained their silence, loyal to the code of the Underworld. The convictions that followed dealt a devastating blow to the mob's operations in Las Vegas. Prison sentences were handed down and millions of dollars in fines were imposed, further weakening their grip on the city. As the mob's influence waned, corporate interests began to move in. Large companies, many of them publicly traded, saw an opportunity to legitimize and expand Las Vegas into a global entertainment destination. The Stardust was among the properties that changed hands during this period, as corporations sought to distance the casinos from their criminal pasts. These new owners introduced sweeping changes, implementing stricter regulations and modernizing operations. The days of suitcases filled with skimmed cash secretly flown to mob bosses were over. Every dollar that passed through the casinos was now meticulously tracked and accounted for. The transition wasn't without challenges. The mob, though weakened, was not entirely gone. Some remnants of their operations lingered, and isolated acts of violence reminded the city of its darker past. In addition, the corporate takeover brought its own set of controversies. Critics argued that the influx of big business threatened to erase the unique character of Las Vegas, turning it into a sanitized, overly commercialized version of itself. But the new leaders of the city were determined to push forward, focusing on growth, tourism, and creating an image of legitimacy. One of the most dramatic changes was the shift in the city's identity. For decades, Las Vegas had been known as a playground for adults, a place where vices were not just tolerated but celebrated. Under corporate leadership, the city began marketing itself as a family-friendly destination. Casinos were redesigned to include arcades, theme parks, and other attractions aimed at younger audiences. Hotels expanded their amenities to appeal to families, and large-scale entertainment productions became a staple of the Strip. This rebranding effort wasn't without its critics, but it succeeded in broadening Las Vegas's appeal. Tourism skyrocketed, and the city's economy flourished. Mega resorts like the Mirage and the Bellagio set new standards for luxury and spectacle, attracting millions of visitors from around the world. The bright lights of the Strip, once symbols of the mob's power, now represented a new era of prosperity and reinvention. Despite the success of the corporate era, the legacy of the mob still lingers in Las Vegas. The city's history is inextricably tied to the stories of men like Bugsy Siegel, Frank Rosenthal, and Tony Spilotro, whose ambition, greed, and ruthlessness helped shape it into what it is today. The Stardust, once the epicenter of the mob's operations, stood as a reminder of that turbulent past until its demolition in 2007. Its implosion marked the end of an era, but it also symbolized the city's ability to reinvent itself. Las Vegas continues to thrive as a global entertainment capital, its streets lined with glittering resorts, world-class restaurants, and endless attractions. The city's dark history has become a part of its mythology, a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the cost of power. Visitors can still feel the echoes of that history in the neon lights and desert air, a reminder of the men who built the city and the lengths they went to hold on to it. The rise and fall of the mob in Las Vegas is a story of contrasts of glamour and violence, ambition and betrayal, creation and destruction. It is a story that transformed a small desert town into a world-famous destination. While the mob may no longer rule the Strip, their legacy is etched into the fabric of Las Vegas, a city built on risk, reinvention, and the unrelenting pursuit of the American dream. The bright lights may shine brighter than ever, but the shadows of the past will always linger, reminding the world of the city's extraordinary journey. The mob's reign over Las Vegas was a time of glamour, greed, and violence, a deadly mix that created a city like no other. From the ambition of Bugsy Siegel to the brutal end of Tony Spilotro, their story is one of power gained and power lost. Thank you for watching Mystery Minds, the channel where we uncover the stories lurking in the shadows. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for another journey into the dark and twisted world of true crime.